Doing pretty well. You know, it's a busy week for all of us, but if you're a fan of New York racing, it just doesn't get any better than Belmont Stakes week. It's just a great menu of racing over these 3 days and culminating in Saturdays. Just really stellar card.
Absolutely. The Stakes Festival got off to a great start today, and we're just looking to build momentum through the weekend. Thrilled to have you with us and thrilled you were able to carve some time out of this busy week to talk about these races and to talk a little bit about TimeformUS. Also joined by a man who was pressed into double duty this week, did a fantastic job on last night's handicapping session, along with Andy Serling. Folks interested in that deep dive into the Belmont Stakes itself can check out drf.com/YouTube to view that replay. This man at one point on his resume was also listed as a TimeformUS analyst. These days, he's a DRF handicapper, specifically the New York handicapper. He's Mike Beer. Mike, how you doing tonight?
Pete, didn't we just do this? What is going on?
You're having a little deja vu all over again?
We doing this again? How's it going, guys? I'm happy to be here. I agree with everything David said at the open. I don't mind sticking around to do this second session about the races because the races are very, very good in New York this weekend.
And the good news is, when we get to the Belmont Stakes itself, we can let David do a little bit more of the heavy lifting since you're already on record with
I will have already checked out at that point. David can carry the Belmont Stakes.
He can be the relief pitcher coming in from the bullpen to bring things home. Want to point out that you can ask us questions at any time during the webinar. We'll get to as many of them as possible. Our producer, Jake, is showing on your screen right now how to go ahead and do that. Very different show tonight than we had last night, in truth, because we are going to go through not just the Belmont Stakes, but all of the stakes races on Saturday's card. And that means that we're going to begin with what goes as race 2 at Belmont on Saturday. Post time is 12:07, an early post with, I suppose, the first race at 11:30. We'll leave that one for you guys to figure out on your own. We'll start with race 2, the easy goer. The morning line favorite is West Coast for Bob Baffert. David, we'll start with you. Is it going to be Mr. Baffert and West Coast in the winner's circle, or do you have something a little more creative for the easy goer?
I guess we're going to take a quick glance at this race. I mean, it seems like the two horses that stand out are West Coast and Outplay. But when you really dig into both of their form, I think you can find some chinks in their armor. West Coast was kind of really with the track when he ran well in the Lexington. That was a dead rail day at Keeneland, and horses making outside moves seemed to do well. But I just didn't love his last race at Santa Anita. It was a pretty weak field, and I thought he had to work pretty hard to beat them. He's just facing a tougher field here, and sure, he can win. I just didn't think he was that interesting. I was more against Outplay, who I just think is kind of a phony. I don't really trust his last speed figure. The second place finisher came back to run like 29 fire points slower his next start. His maiden win was against a bunch of turf horses. I just thought these favorites were beatable. I wanted to take a shot with a long shot in this race. I thought jamming with Brandon was a little interesting. His race 2 back at Belmont, he went after a really fast pace in that spot, and he was run down by Tale of Silence, who's also in this race. But Tale of Silence got a perfect trip that day, sitting off that fast pace. Same with Brandon, just ran better than it seems that day. We gave him a 1:16 TimeformUS speed figure for that race. That actually puts him, on par with some of the top contenders in here. And then last time at Pimlico, it was a weaker field. He just got a weird ride in that race. It was like Rosario was just losing position with him for the entire race. When he actually got him to go on the outside in the stretch, he was making a good late run. I just think this horse is better than it seems, and he's really improved for some low-profile connections. And maybe he would get lost in the wagering and be, a decent price that can get into the trifecta.
I love it. Starting with a bang for David Aragona, number 4, jamming with Brandon, installed at 30-1 on the morning line. Mike, what are your thoughts on this race?
I kind of agree. I don't really have anything to say about this race. I wasn't thrilled with it. From a wager perspective, I'm not a big West Coast guy. I understand that he's logical in this race, but I don't really love any of his races. Chad Brown's horse, You're to Blame, makes sense to me, if only because he's had a couple things I think working against him in his most recent couple of starts. I'm not convinced that he's a true routing horse. I almost feel like he's better off around the 7 furlong distance. That's my real problem with him. but I think each of his last 2 races are probably both better than they look. So I would just rather have him than a horse like West Coast. Jamming with Brandon, I picked 3rd in the paper. I think everything David said about him is true. I'm not sure if he's good enough to win this race, but he is better than he looks on paper. And I'll just throw in, the one horse who I'm just going to use in the pick 5 is number 5 Local Hero for Asmussen, just because he has big speed. And I'm just, kind of hoping that Irad Ortiz is sending this horse in this race. They didn't make the front with him on that wet track at Churchill last time, but when they let him roll, he's fast, and I think he's dangerous speed in this race.
Seems like one who, based on that Louisiana Derby run, was crying out for the cutback, had a little bit of a trip last time. Definitely one of the more interesting ones in there at the lower end of the odds spectrum, and I like the idea of including some prices in the pick 5 there as well. Let's move on to race 3. It's the Grade 2 Brooklyn. Mike, who's it going to be in here?
I wanted to say Governor Malibu. That was going to be the horse who I just felt like this was the right spot for him. And I kept thinking that, for all of the, 2 hours that I had to handicap the card last night before I had to send in my analysis. But I don't know. I keep making excuses for Governor Malibu, and then he kind of keeps disappointing me. But I still think he's good. I think the 1.5 miles is fine for him. Obviously, based on his Belmont last year, it is. He had a little bit of a trip there. I thought he ran well. I like him, and I think he can win this race. I'm ultimately not, I'm ultimately not against Two Brutus, the favorite. He's not even the favorite. He's the second choice to send it in. I'm ultimately not against him, though. I was, like everyone else, I think, surprised that the figure for the Excelsior came back what it was. And I know speed was good that day, but this horse made, let's call it an enterprising pace that day, going 1.25 miles. I thought that was a really nice performance, and I was very interested to see what he would do when they brought him back. And I don't know, he didn't do anything to dissuade me in the flat out last time. He crushed that field. He's got a lot of speed. I think they'll put him on the front. Hopefully he gets the 1.5 miles. I like him and Governor Malibu. I get that Send It In can win, and I wouldn't, leave him out of the pick 5 or anything, but I'll bet against him if he's the favorite.
David, do you see it in a similar way?
Yeah, kind of like Mike, I really wanted to like Governor Malibu in this race. I kind of see this as a 3-horse race with each of these 3 horses that Mike mentioned kind of having an equal chance to win. I don't really expect Send It In to Brutus to get back to that gigantic speed figure they ran the Excelsior. But I also don't think either of them are going to have much trouble handling the 1.5 mile distance. So they just make a whole lot of sense to me. Send It In is the kind of horse that always takes a lot of money, so just because of that, he's not really my kind of horse, but I can't deny that he just seems to keep improving with every start, unlike most Pletcher horses. He just keeps getting better, and I don't want to knock horses like that just seem to rise to the occasion every time they're asked. Governor Malibu, I kind of like what Mike said. I make a lot of excuses for him. I do like that he's drawn on the rail because he is the kind of horse that seems to hug the rail in his races. The issue is that Jose Ortiz just has to probably get him off the rail at some point to make his move, which has been problematic for him on some occasions. But I think he's going to handle the distance, and I just thought he'd be the best price of the 3, so I landed on him.
All right, 154, it sounds like, for David in race 3. Moving on to race 4, it's the Grade 1 Acorn. David, what's your approach going to be in here? Do you like Abel Tasman for a repeat?
This is one of the smaller fields, but it's one of the more difficult races for me because there's kind of problems with every horse in the race. I guess Abel Tasman might be the best horse in here, but she just got such a perfect trip in terms of the pace in the Kentucky Oaks. She was kind of wide on a day you wanted to be down on the rail. But, that race just totally fell apart in the late stages, and she was the horse that was in the clear and didn't really have her momentum broken at any point, and that was enough to get her in the winner's circle. It's a different situation here because there's not any real speed in this race except for Florida Fabulous and I guess Nikki My Darling, who looks overmatched. I don't expect the pace to be all that fast here. Maybe Abel Tasman is good enough to overcome that. But out of the Kentucky Oaks, I kind of preferred Salty. I just thought she had more tactical speed than Abel Tasman. And if you really watch the trips, I thought Salty was the horse that had more trouble. And I don't know if she was going to win that race, but she just got her momentum stopped at a couple of points coming to the quarter pole there. And she got outside late, but just, it's hard to kind of regain your momentum when you get stopped like that on sloppy tracks. And, I thought the mile would be better for her than it would be for Abel Tasman. So I landed on Salty. The horse that I was kind of against in here is Sweet Loretta. I just thought she'd beat a pretty weak field in the Beaumont last time, and I'm not sure she really wants to go a mile anyway. So for me, it was mostly 8-3.
Mike, are you looking at those same fillies coming out of the Kentucky Oaks, or are you looking for a different path to the winner's circle here in the Acorn?
I'll admit that I do like Salty. I'm kind of against Abel Tasman. I know that she can win. To me, she's not one of the horses who I actually think, turning back to a one-turn mile is actually going to help her. To me, she just seems like much more of a routing, two-turn kind of routing horse. And as David said, she just had all the best of it in the Kentucky Oaks. Salty had a little bit of trouble in that race. I thought it cost her at a pretty key point. And I loved her Gulfstream Park Oaks 2 starts back. I thought she ran great that day. Her pace was pretty fast. She made an early run into it. I really liked that performance from her. So I would kind of rather have her out of the Kentucky Oaks. So I'm gonna use her. I agree with David about Sweet Loretta. She's done nothing wrong. I'm just not a fan. I think she beat a bad field off the layoff. I know it got a figure, but I want to see her do that again. The other horse, the one horse that I'm definitely using though, and I just made her my top pick in the paper, if only because she's going to be a price in this race, is the 6 Tequilita. And to me, she's just the classic, horse who doesn't want to go long. The last 2 races, she didn't even run poorly in the Gulfstream Oaks behind Salty. I thought she ran fine to be second that day, but she's not really a 2-turn routing kind of horse. The Oaks, okay, they took their shot, didn't work out. She turns back now. I think the 1-turn mile is really good for her. All of her 1-turn races, between 6 and 8 furlongs are good. She's got to get a little faster. I'm hoping that she can do it. I'm hoping the turn back really works for her, and maybe she just gets the right trip in this race and is, sort of hanging around at the end here. Even if she can't win it, I think she can get a piece of it. So I made her my top pick, and she's a horse I definitely want to fool around with in this race.
Tequilita at 12-1, definitely a way to get a little bit of juice in that early pick 5 we talked about, and the other multi-race wagers surrounding the Acorn as well. While we're on the topic of grade 1s, let's move on to the Phipps, which goes as race 5. Mike, is this a race where you just expect Songbird to go to the lead and improve her position, or do you think it might be a little more complicated than that?
No, I didn't really. Maybe it is more complicated than that. I just didn't try and make it more complicated than that. She's, she's a short price off of a layoff. I think you always at least want to, pause for a second or two before you just send it in. But you know what? She's better than these horses. I don't see how they keep her from making the lead in this race. And if she just comes back off the layoff and she's, close to, what she was last year, then I just think she's going to beat this field. There are some good fillies and mares in here, but she's better than that.
David, is that your view of this race, or are you going to look to go against Songbird a little more enthusiastically, making her return to the races?
No, I feel pretty much the same way. There are plenty of opportunities to take shots against favorites on this card, but I don't think this is really one of them. For me, the key is that there's just no other speed in this race, or nobody that I think is going to try to go with her. I guess Karina Mia could try to apply some pressure, but she's tried that before and it hasn't worked out for her. I feel like they'll probably be more likely to revert to the tactics that she used in the Acorn last year when she was stretching out. Just kind of feels like Songbird's going to control this race up front, and if she returns as the same horse as a 4-year-old, she's just going to win.
If you were, in terms of your multi-race play, David, do you think you put 100% of it through Songbird, or would you attempt to have any savers here?
I guess if I was going to back up with anybody, it might be Paid Up Subscriber, who is more of a horse I would use in maybe exactas and trifectas in this kind of race, but rather than on the win end. But I think you do want to note with her that she just had a really uncomfortable trip last time in the La Troyenne. This distance is better for her than the Madison when she first returned from the layoff. And I don't think she really got to show what she can do last time on the sloppy track. So she's better than those two races. And I think she's probably going to take a step forward now for Chad Brown. I don't think she's going to beat Songbird, but she's the other horse that I think I would take a look at in there, at least to complete the exacta. Race
6 is the Jaipur, grade 3, 6 furlongs on the turf. David, we'll keep it with you. Do you think Pure Sensation can make it 2 years in a row in this race?
This race was a real head-scratcher for me. There are just so many ways to go. I'm interested in both of the Generosio horses. I do expect Pure Sensation to run better than he did in his return from the layoff, just because he's not a horse that really likes softer turf courses, and the firm turf he's going to get on Saturday is much more to his liking. 6 furlongs, perfect for him. He's just very logical. Also, there's not a ton of speed in this race. Often in these turf sprints, we see a lot of really fast horses that a horse like Pure Sensation would have to deal with. That's just not really the case. I mean, I guess Loose on the Town is going to go from the rail, but it's not like he's that fast. So I think Pure Sensation is going to probably be right up on the lead. He just makes a whole lot of sense in here. I probably prefer his stablemate Disco Partner, though, even though he's going to be slightly against the pace. I just love all of his races at Belmont. It just seems like he really runs well here. And he doesn't really need a fast pace to run into. He just seems to have such a strong kick through the stretch. And I liked his return from the layoff when, you know, again, there was really nobody moving ahead of him, and he just ran those horses down so easily. If Gerardo Ortiz can work out any kind of trip for him, I think he's probably going to be pretty tough to hold off here. If I was going to look at a longer shot, I'd probably give a, you know, maybe he can't win the race, but I'd want to use Conquest Enforcer, the 9-horse, somewhere in there, maybe an exact as trifectas, just because I think turning back on the turf is really going to be to his liking. His 2 turf sprints were actually really good efforts. And since then, he's just been focusing on longer 2-turn races. And maybe just because of the low-profile connection, he's going to get overlooked in the wagering, and there are so many ways to go in this race. I just thought he might be a price that would offer some value.
Yeah, when you go and look at those back races sprinting on the turf, you see figures that aren't that far off of the best of these. David also talking about the pace in here. It's as good an opportunity as any to highlight one of the special features in the TimeformUS PPs, the pace projector, which does indicate that this race, the way it shakes out, potentially is going to favor horses on or near the lead. Great information to have. Mike Beer, how do you see the Jaipur?
Pretty similarly. I mean, I like Conquest Enforcer in this race, and I picked him in the paper, and I'm going to bet him in this race. And, you know, we'll just see what happens. I agree with David in that I like this horse as a sprinter. I know that he won a grade 2 in California around 2 turns at a mile, but this horse, he doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to go a distance to ground. I'm not sure why they continued to press on with him in longer races. To me, this is way more what he wants to do. And, you know, as that pace projector indicates, you know, with the horses, you know, that can be up close, maybe being in a better position in this race. This horse is fast. I mean, he doesn't have to be on the lead, but he's fast. And so I think as long as Gaffney gets him forward in this race, I think he'll have a reasonable chance to go with these horses. I am not against Disco Partner at all. I like every one of his races. You know, I would argue, and he got beaten this race last year by his stablemate, Pure Sensation. They ran 1-2 in this race last year. I would argue that Disco Partner ran the better race of the 2 last year. That pace was not fast or competitive last year, and he made a huge run in that race to just miss. So I don't know. I would just rather have him. I like the way he came back off the layoff. And, you know, I'll just say that, you know, one horse that I'm going to use and who I don't necessarily expect to win, but I just have to use Green Mask because, you know, he's a horse who settles a little bit too much for me. A lot of races where it looks like he's going to win or he should win, and he winds up for some reason not sealing the deal and he gets beat at the end. And maybe the softer ground has something to do with it last time, but he looked like a different horse to me last time. I don't know what is responsible for it, but I mean, he absolutely crushed that field at Churchill last time. And if he can run another race like that in this race, then I think that he can win. I'll use him. But I really wanted, you know, the more I looked at this race, the more I want to bet Conquest Enforcer.
Some very interesting thoughts on this race, especially with 15-1 Conquest Enforcer. Green Mask definitely did seem to have a little bit more of that killer instinct last time. Before we move on from the race, I just want to underline something that both guests touched on with number 2, Disco Partner. And this is another cool feature of the TimeformUS PPs. You can see that this is a horse who has been closing and closing well despite not getting the setups typically associated with closers. Well, how can you see that? Very easy in the color-coded TimeformUS PPs. You can see those blue highlighted fractions there in the last 2 running lines, indicating that those were fractional times that were actually slow relative to the final time. So this is not a horse benefiting from meltdowns. This is a horse who has an awful lot of run and is definitely an interesting one to have somewhere in your verticals, at least, if not on the top of your wagers on Saturday. Let's move on to race 7. It's the Woody Stephens 7 furlongs, the other race for 3-year-olds. Mike, who are you gravitating towards in this one?
I'm going to preface this by saying nobody's required to come along with me on this race. But
I like the apology.
Yeah, this is one of those races where, and I don't necessarily expect this horse to win, but I am going to bet him, and then try and get him in there second and third in this race, because I don't trust the favorites in this race. It's not that I shouldn't say I don't trust them, but the favorites in this race are all horses that I have. There are little things that make me not want to bet them to win in this race, and so. I'm going to bet Hard Scramble, the 6 for Steve Asmussen. He's a huge price on the morning line, and he's not fast enough as of now to win this race. But he is a horse whose first 3 starts, in all 3 of them, he didn't, to me anyway, didn't run as poorly as it looks in any of those races. He just is a horse who couldn't get the distances they were sending him. Every one of them, he was right in contention down to about the 8th pole of those races, and then he didn't finish at all. And as soon as Asmussen turned him back 2 starts ago, he really upped his game, and I thought he upped it in a very big way. He was a little rank in that race, a little bit headstrong, and he got in a little bit tight spot between horses, but I just like how he held his position the entire way, and as soon as he came clear, he just took the race right over, and he won very easily, and I really thought it was a huge step forward for him. And then they ran him on the Derby undercard. It wasn't even the undercard. It was the race after the Derby at Churchill Downs last time. And to me, he just looked like a horse. He just missed in there, but he just looked to me like a horse who didn't like the wet track. I'm going to give him that excuse for that race and hope that he can take a step forward in here, because I like his races. I think there's something there with him. And, the horses that are going to take all the money, American Anthem, I get it. He was better when they turned him back last time, and it was nice for him to show that he can still run. But I don't know. For some reason, I just didn't love that race. I didn't love the field that he beat. He got it done. Maybe he'll just win this race, but I didn't want to bet him at a short price. Wild Shot, I like a lot as a horse, but last time was the time when they finally turned him back on a wet track. I thought he ran great last time, but that was the time to bet him at 8-1. So I'm going to use him, but I'm just going to try and beat these horses, or at least if he can't beat them, I'm going to try and get Hard Scramble to get in there somewhere and try and spice up the exotics in this race.
Really interesting case for the Calumet Farms Color Bear Hard Scramble number 6 at 20-1 on the morning line. David, where are you in the Woody Stephens?
Look, there are a lot of horses that can win this race. I guess I kind of wanted to discuss the TimeformUS pace projector of this race, because it's kind of an interesting situation where we have Recruiting Ready predicted to be on a clear lead in a situation that's favoring the horse that's on the lead. I just don't really trust this horse to get 7 furlongs. And also I want to note where Wild Shot is in this pace projector. The pace projector is based on how fast horses have run in their prior races, and they just spent a lot of time making Wild Shot into a closing router this winter, which was just an ill-advised move. And I think if they were just basing the pace projector on his last race in the Pate Mile, he'd probably be projected to be up close to the pace. So this pace might be quicker than the pace projector is predicting it to be. Just worth noting if you're thinking about betting Recruiting Ready here. Recruiting Ready is a talented horse. I just don't really like him in this spot. Wild Shot can win. I agree with what Mike said, that last time was the time to have him. I think this is probably a tougher race than that Pate Mile was. And he's got to, run a little faster early and keep going here. I'm not really sure how I feel about American Anthem. His last race was fine. He may have to come from a bit further off the pace here. He just seems like a horse that takes a little while to get into stride, and I don't always love horses like that, races that have a good amount of speed in them. I landed on Petrov in this race. I know his sprint races don't look that fast in his first couple of starts, but that King Swan that he ran in his second race, it's actually a better effort than it seems. He was kind of down on the inside in that race, almost like they were schooling him behind horses for the first time, just almost not that concerned about winning that race and more concerned about getting him some sort of trip that day. The pace was pretty slow ahead of him, and he did some running in the stretch of that race to almost get to the winner. Since then, he's really improved, going distances that are probably too far for him. He's just your classic turnback that probably wants to go a distance at more like the 7 furlongs. And I thought he'd get enough pace to run into to close this field down late.
Couple of very interesting price options from the guys in the Woody Stevens. I like that point a lot that David makes about the pace projector. The algorithm that generates it is based on a series of the last races. I think it's 3 or 4 that are used in that. And so when you have a horse who's sort of found a new game, you've got to evaluate it in that context. And I love the pace projector. It's a great thing to use as a starting point, but it's not a substitute for doing the work yourself of actually handicapping and looking deeper into it and trying to come up with some pace angles like David did there. So just another cool aspect of TimeformUS to underline before we move on to race 8, our next grade 1 on the day. It's the Just a Game. Seems like there are a whole lot of cases to be made in this race. David, who do you like here?
I kind of saw this as probably a 3-horse race between Dickinson, Roca Rojo, and Celestine. Dickinson's been in great form. I have the utmost respect for this horse. I think a mile is probably a great distance for her. Roca Rojo, also Chad Brown's done a great job with her. She probably wants the turf course a little more given it. I wonder if she's quite as good as the other 2 I mentioned on firm turf, but she certainly has to be respected. Just looking at the pace of this race, I guess Sassy Little Lila is going to head off to the lead. I just think Celestine projects to get the exact same trip that she got in this race last year, just, tracking a moderate pace. She is like tailor-made for this one-turn mile at Belmont Park. I know her last 2 races came up a little slower than some of the best figures that she ran last year, but she's coming into this race with the same pattern. I just think this is the perfect kind of spot for her. She's going to get the really firm turf course that she loves, and maybe she'll be a slightly higher price than the other 2. I don't even care about that. I just think Celestine is in the perfect spot, and she can repeat in this race.
Mike, do you like Celestine's chances of making it 2 years in a row?
Yeah, I do. I agree that it's mostly a 3-horse race with the same 3 horses David mentioned. I sort of, prefer Celestine and Dickinson to Roca Rojo, and Roca Rojo can obviously win. I sort of prefer the other 2, and like David, I like Celestine. I think she gets the right trip in this race. I was a little concerned that Clement didn't run her after the Honey Fox because I, thought that maybe they would find another race for her, but then you notice that Mott trained her last year, just did the same thing. Honey Fox waited for this race, and she just crushed that field. And I just think she's in a good spot here. And I agree with David too that maybe Sassy Little Lila sends off to the front and is fast enough to get there. I don't think that matters if Celestine doesn't make the front. And if it turns out that Sassy Little Lila is just not fast enough to get there, then Celestine can go to the lead and wire this field. I don't think it's going to be easy for her to beat Dickinson because I like every one of Dickinson's turf races. She just seems to me like a horse who keeps getting better. But they were my 2 main horses in this race. I want to give a little, shout out to the other Chad horse, Antino. I don't know if she's good enough to beat this field. I know that there's been some buzz around her. And I feel like if you go back and watch the first 2 starts of her career when she started out in France, you would think this horse is going to be a superstar. She was unbelievable in those 2 races. And I don't know what happened. She just, sort of lost her form after that. She didn't do much running at all last year as a 3-year-old. But, Chad got her to win off the layoff at Keeneland. And listen, that trip really worked out for her. But she also really finished that race off with a pretty nice run. If he's gotten her good, and I think it's a pretty confident place for him to run this horse. I think he knew what this field was going to look like, and he's going to run her anyway. So, maybe that's a good sign for her. I don't love her in this race, but, I'll be very interested to see what she does because if Chad gets her back to what she started out like she was going to be, she could be a player in this division.
I don't mind the idea of trying to mix in number 7 Antono at a price in your verticals, or even as a saver in there. We're highlighting another really cool feature of the TimeformUS PPs right now, which is the ability to look at the Timeform, the original Timeform comments, get a more extended view of these horses' performances overseas. Also have an opportunity to look at their Timeform UK ratings, which gives you an opportunity to compare UK, in this case, I guess, French, and USA form on an apples-to-apples basis. Another one of the things that makes the TimeformUS PPs special. And of course, we also have those included in the regular pages of Daily Racing Form and in the Formulator PPs as well. Some of the good stuff you get from both DRF and TimeformUS. Let's have the parade of Grade 1s continue with the Met Mile. An interesting addition to this race. I think I could probably say you make very similar comments about this race as I will when we get to the Belmont Stakes in a couple races' time. I feel like, in my view, what they lack in star power, they make up for it by being interesting handicapping puzzles. Mike, how are you going to solve this puzzle?
Yeah, I agree with that. This maybe it didn't get the stars, but it's got a sort of a wide open feel to it. And I kind of feel that way mostly because More Spirit is the morning line favorite. I guess I get it. He's got figures on the way in for Baffert. And, so maybe he's just finally starting to put it all together, and this will be his day. But he doesn't strike me as that interesting a horse in this race at a short price. They found a couple of soft spots for him on the way in here. There's this thing with him, where I watch him run and I just feel like maybe he's like a little bit of a lazy horse maybe, and there probably is something more there with him, but I don't know. I don't like him all that much in this race. I guess he's sort of a defensive use for me. I like Sharp Azteca's race in Dubai. I thought he ran really well that day, and I guess the one-turn mile is fine for him. He's probably on the lead in this race. The pace projector has him right out there on the front, and I do sort of feel like he's just fastest early in this race. But I could also kind of go either way on him. I haven't always been his biggest fan. We'll see. I'm going to use him as well. My idea in this race is to try and get Denman's Call to win it at a price. This horse, he's come back really good this year. There was a long layoff with this horse after the Las Barrera last year, and his first few starts back off the layoff have actually been really good, including that second start off the layoff was, just an unbelievable performance. He totally blew the start of that race and made a huge run to get back into it, and was really unlucky not to win even after giving away all the advantage early. And then, the Triple Bend, listen, maybe it's a Grade 1 in name only. Masochistic, the horse that he beat, he's one of those horses. He's really fast, but, he also doesn't have, a ton of fight in him. And if you challenge him, then he just, really won't fight back on you. But in that case, I don't think Denman's Call, sort of lucked into winning that race. He took that race to Denman's Call early and put him, or to a Masochistic early, put him away and finished it off at the end. I thought he ran really well in the Triple Bend, and it was a really nice step forward for a horse who I think is right now starting to improve. And listen, he gets a pass from me for his last race on the Derby undercard. He did not break well in that race again. He made a run to contention in there, like he was maybe going to get a piece of it at the end, and he just got flattened out at the end, and he doesn't have to love a wet track anyway. He gets a pass for that race for me. I think he can get the right position in this race. I think he is an improved horse this year, and I'm glad that Doug O'Neill's running him in this race. I'm going to bet him in here.
Another nice price from Mike Beer, 15-1, Denman's Call, number 3 on the morning line in the Met Mile. David, where are you with this one?
I'll kind of start in the same place that Mike did with the two favorites. Like Mike said, I'm against More Spirit in here. There are a lot of horses that can win this race. It's not like I think this horse can't win. It's just that there are so many really enticing prices that you have as options here, and he's going to be an underlay. And, sure, he's pretty talented. There's just nothing about this horse that really excites me. I know he's put up some pretty fast speed figures in his recent starts, but he's done it against inferior competition, horses like Domain's Rap and Texas Chrome. I mean, he's supposed to beat them by open lengths. And every time he's faced really tough competition, it just seems like he hasn't produced his top effort. So I'm somewhat against this horse. Not so with Sharp Azteca. I think Sharp Azteca is the horse to beat in this spot. Just to kind of expand on what Mike said about his Godolphin Mile, if you just kind of read the short comment that early to lead, headed late, like that's really inadequate. You have to read the full description of how this horse ran in the Timeform foreign comments. I mean, this horse was kind of off slowly. He was part of a 4-horse battle for the lead. The pace of that race completely fell apart. He opened up like 5 lengths past mid-stretch, and some closers came and got him late. But I mean, this horse put in a huge effort that day. And you look back through this horse's PPs, and he's just run well on just about every occasion. Even as Woody Stevens at Belmont last year was a really strong effort breaking from the rail that day. I know his trainer, Jorge Navarro, doesn't have great numbers in New York, but it's not like this is one of these horses that he claims for $20,000 at Monmouth that is now running in a great stakes race. I mean, this horse has just always been good and has taken his game on the road before. I just think Sharp Azteca is way the horse to beat here, especially because there's not a whole lot of speed in this race. I mean, we think of the Met Mile as a race that attracts, routers and sprinters and can sometimes feature a total pace meltdown. I don't think that's going to be the case this year because there aren't that many horses that are going to be jockeying for the lead early, so I do think Sharp Azteca will probably be controlling things on the front end. 2 interesting horses I want to discuss are both of the Todd Pletcher, Paul Pompa horses in this race, Tommy Macho and Rally Cry. Of the 2, I kind of prefer Rally Cry, and I tentatively made him my pick in this race. I just feel like this horse has always had a lot of ability, and they just kind of had trouble putting races back-to-back with him or keeping him on the racetrack, but it does seem like, based on his last race, he's finally put it all together. I know it was just an allowance race, and maybe people who don't follow New York throughout the winter aren't familiar with Diversify, but he is a seriously talented New York-bred horse, and he's put up a ton of huge speed figures throughout the winter, and beating that horse when he really showed up is Rally Cry deserves credit for that. I just thought he'd work out a good trip, probably stalking a moderate pace here, and a mile was the perfect distance for him. Tommy Macho, he definitely has races in him that could win this. It's just he's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde sort of horse. Sometimes he shows up and is a grade 1 type, and sometimes he just seems to not be all there, not really focused on what he's doing. I kind of have mixed feelings about him. If there's a long shot in this race that I want to throw in, it's Virtual Machine. This horse ran a lot better than it looks in his 2 races at Aqueduct on the inner track over the winter against inferior horses, but he was just utterly dominant in those races. And last time out in the Westchester when he lost to Connect, who unfortunately isn't in this race, he was part of a fast pace there, and I thought he ran extremely well to be second, far ahead of the rest of the field, putting away all the other speeds. I know this horse hasn't really faced this level of competition before, but I think he's really improved, and he can be a part of the superfecta.
Hey, at that price, 30 to 1 on the morning line, it certainly wouldn't hurt. Wouldn't cost much to include on some tickets that could pay some big dividends. Seems like the consensus on the Met Mile is that it's a little bit more of a spread race. How about the Manhattan? A good-looking running of this race. There's some very interesting possibilities, bit of an international flair. David, is this a race where you think you'll look to narrow down a bit more, or is it another race where you might try to use several horses and come up with something?
I'm going to try to narrow it down a little bit. I think there are 3 horses that can win this race, or maybe more like 2.5 horses. The half horse would be Beach Patrol, who certainly is talented enough to win, but just doesn't seem to really have, that heart or that will to get it done late. He's just kind of given up in a few situations where he probably should have won races. He just has a little too much hanging in for me. But I do acknowledge that he's going to be on the lead in this race, and there's just not a whole lot of speed. And so often we see these mile-and-a-quarter turf races, just the pace completely backs down, and the riders are not riding aggressively, and whoever's on the lead tends to have an advantage. I do think that's going to be Beach Patrol in this spot. I just kind of expect somebody to pass him late. And the 2 horses that are most likely to do that for me are World Approval and Time Test. Maybe 10 Furlongs is pushing World Approval a little farther than he wants to go. But I think he's talented enough to handle this. His last race in the Dixie, I think it shows that he's back to the world approval that ran in this race last year. And I think he'll be stalking Beach Patrol early, and he just makes a whole lot of sense. I lean towards Time Test as my top pick in this race. Look, he hung really badly in the Fort Marcy last time. There's no denying that. And he's going to have to run a lot better to win this race. But just reading Chad Brown's quotes about this horse, he seemed almost adamant that he was going to run a lot better here, and really frustrated that the true Time Test didn't show up last time. He really kind of stressed the point that this horse wants a firm turf course. He's going to get that on Saturday. And based on this horse's European form, I mean, he does have the potential to be another Flintshire type that just comes to this country and takes this division by storm. He didn't show it last time, but I think if we're going to see the true Time Test, it could be Saturday. And I don't think we'll get 5-1 on him, but he was my top pick in here.
Yeah, I mean, he was always supposed to be a very good horse. I had the opportunity to see him in the flesh when I was over there a couple of years ago. Very impressive individual, and certainly the form from the York race and the Sandown race would stamp him as the ones to beat. There's also no denying that the two USA races, granted, with cut in the ground, have not been his best work. Mike Beer, what do you think? What price is Time Test going to be on Saturday, if you had to guess?
I'd say it's closer to 2-1, 5-2, maybe. I think he's going to take a lot of money. I think that 5-1 morning line's way off. I won't be surprised if he's the favorite. Listen, he can win. I know that Chad Brown knows what he's doing, and I know that he really likes this horse. But I just don't get it. I don't understand. I don't get the idea, first of all, based on his European form, that he is a top-class horse, because he wasn't a top-class horse over there. He's not a Group 1 horse. They tried him in a couple Group 1 races. He wasn't close to good enough in those races. The Acorn Eclipse Stakes at Sandown last July. I know it was soft ground, and maybe that's not his thing. He was no match for those horses in there. So he's more of a Group 2, Group 3 European horse. That's, all well and good. He's been to the States twice. He did no running in the Breeders' Cup Mile of 2015, and he got beat by Smooth Daddy last time. It's fine if you don't like yielding ground. Don't get beat by Smooth Daddy, and then come into the Manhattan at a short price. He can win. He's the kind of horse who I will refuse to get knocked out of like the pick 4 buy, but I wouldn't bet him in a million years in this race, because to me he just hasn't shown that he's that good of a horse. We'll see what happens with him on Saturday. I like World Approval's last race. I thought he ran. I like his last couple of races. I think he's come back really good this year. So I'm definitely using him. Beach Patrol, okay. I'm not a huge fan. He'll be on the lead in here. I think he's okay and can win. And I'll use, the thing with me at this race is Divisadero, who I think is good enough to win. I don't like him at 1.25 miles. I do like his last 2 races because his first 2 starts of the year weren't good. And it sort of felt like maybe he couldn't run anymore. But his last 2 races are good. I just don't like him at 1.25 miles. We'll see what happens. I wonder if he really wants to go this far. That's my one thing with him. So the other horse that I'm going to use, and the horse that I really like, I'm a really big fan of this horse, and maybe he's not good enough for a race like this, but I like Sadler's Joy, and I'm going to use him too. I feel like he was always headed to races like this. Even just going back to the beginning of his career, he started to get good last summer. It was almost like by the time they got to the end of the year last year, you could see that he was going to be a graded stakes horse. And I think he is a graded stakes horse now. He ran really well in those 2 races at Gulfstream over the winter. He won the Pan American with a big late run. That's what this horse does. He makes big late runs in his races. So he is going to probably need a little bit of pace in here. And I just think you're supposed to forgive him for the Man of War. Not that he ran terribly in there, but it was just a race he had no chance to win. He finished 3rd. He was the 2nd best horse in the race. Behind a horse that he just couldn't beat, and he just had no setup at all in there. I don't know. I like him. I think he has a chance in here. I'm mostly World Approval and Sadler's Joy. Time Test, if he wins, great. that's fine. Maybe I'll have 50 cents on him in the pick 4. I really don't get why I'm supposed to believe he's, some kind of top class horse. I guess we'll see what happens.
Sounds like pure defense for you on that one. Before we move on from the Manhattan, David, I just wanted to come back to you for your thoughts on Divisadero. Are you also concerned about the 10 furlongs, or did you have another reason for not considering him a primary contender?
No, pretty much the same reasoning. This horse just has such an awesome turn of foot. It races around a mile and a 16th. He really seems to love that Churchill Downs turf course. But the 2 times that he's really stretched out, at Belmont Park, actually, both times, he just hasn't had that same kick. He's a horse that kind of is okay with being parked outside in his races, and his riders seem to do that a lot with him. I don't think that's the trip you want to get in this race. I just don't really see a path to him winning. I know he's a popular horse. He's going to take money, and I just thought there were better opportunities in here.
Hey, as we know, the ability to oppose favorites you think who are going to be overbet can be just as valuable as landing on horses you like at prices, especially with multi-race betting, a topic we'll talk about a little bit once we finish going through the stakes races. And the final one of those stakes races is race 11. It's the Belmont, going off at 6:37 on Saturday night. I'm tempted to be really cheeky, Mike, and not even let you talk about this race and make them watch the whole show from last night, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, let's have you very quickly go through your thoughts, and then we'll let David expound a little bit on the race.
I really don't have many thoughts. I'll give you a couple of thumbnails real quick. Irish War Cry to me is probably the horse to beat, but I'm just not really a fan. His 2 big races to me are dressed up. And so I kind of wonder how good he really is. And I know that he could win, but I wouldn't bet him in this race. So I was just, against him with all the stuff going on with Epicurus, the Japanese horse. And I'm a little leery of him, but I know that this is a good spot for him. Our stateside 3-year-olds they do nothing for me. So I think it's a good spot for a horse like him, but boy, you got to be concerned with what's happening with that horse right now. I got it down to my top 2 picks in the race. The 2 horses I really just, sort of wanted to fool around with, Multiplier and Gormley, who I don't think Gormley wants a mile and a half, but he ran better than it looks in the Derby last time. Maybe he gets the right trip in this race and can hang around for a piece of it. I don't have a huge opinion here. I sort of was scouting around for prices, and I'm a Multiplier fan.
David, who's going to get the money here?
So I've landed on Patch, and I'll preface this by saying I don't think Patch is a very good horse. But I kind of have landed on Patch because I just expect the horses that are going to take money in this race, the shorter prices, to really underperform. I don't like Irish War Cry. I don't think he wants a mile and a half. I think if he encounters a straw in his path, he's just going to fall apart. That's what he's shown in both the Fountain of Youth and the Kentucky Derby. So I don't really trust that horse. I guess a lot of people might land on a horse like Looking at Lee, who just got that perfect trip in the Derby, and he was coming late in the Preakness, and I guess the theory is horses that are running on late are supposed to like a mile and a half. That just doesn't always seem to work out in the Belmont Stakes. So maybe Looking at Lee gets in the Super, but he's not the kind of horse I really want to pick. I thought I was going to pick Taprit. I kind of remembered him having a trip in the Derby, so I went back and was really closely scrutinizing the trips in the Derby to kind of see what I wanted to see with Taprit. I know he had trouble at the start. After that, he had a pretty good trip. But when I was rewatching the Derby, the horse that I kind of had forgotten about that really did have a trip that day is Patch. He broke from post 20. He actually got over and got into pretty good position under Gaffleone. But then coming around the far turn, if you watch the NBC shot, you can really see it in the blimp shot, that he got steadied pretty hard at 2 key points. When he was trying to follow, I think it was Practical Joke through a hole, and the hole just closed up, and he lost momentum there. He tried to go around the tiring horses, and I think IRAP darted to the outside and again cut him off. He just was robbed of any momentum he might have had in that race. And I know we lost by over 20 lengths, and he probably wasn't going to finish in the top 6 anyway, but it was a better effort than it seems. And as I go through this race, I'm thinking, who is not going to completely fall apart at a mile and a half? And, to me, it's probably Patch, who's by a Belmont winner, Out of the Dam, who's sired by a Belmont winner. He's the family of that great dirt routing mare, Banshee Breeze. There's just a ton of stamina all through his pedigree. So I don't love Patch as a racehorse. I just think he's in the right spot, and if he's ever going to find the day to shine, kind of like a Jazzle back from a previous Belmont, that maybe this would be the right race for him. You know, if I had to pick the most likely winner of this race, I guess it would be the Japanese horse, Epicharis. You know, I hate kind of saying a horse like that is most likely winner because there's so many unknowns with him. But, you know, just also based on his pedigree, Sunday Silence has proved to be a huge stamina influence in Japan. His sire, Gold Allure, is really the best Japanese dirt sire that there's been. And then, you know, on the dam side, he's got a ton of stamina there. He's a half to a group winner going 10 furlongs, placed at the Mile 3/8 in Japan. The dam sire, Carnegie, was a winner of the Arc de Triomphe. So, you know, there's a ton of stamina in that pedigree. I didn't love his UAE Derby effort. Thunder Snow's a nice horse who beat him. I just thought this was a horse that could kind of plod along and would get the distance. He has some real talent. So I want to use those two. I'll use Tappert as well. I think he might get the distance. You know, we've seen Tappert sire two Belmont Stakes winners, and he's run fine in his races. I've never been a huge fan of this horse, but he's just kind of one of these plodding types that has enough tactical speed to be in the mix throughout. I thought he'd be around at the end. You know, I hear what Mike's saying about Gormley. I guess I kind of respect him. I just didn't think he'd get the distance. He was one kind of like Irish Warcry that I didn't really like going this far. And, you know, all the horses coming out of the Preakness that were making late runs in that race, I just generally didn't want them. I thought it was kind of an illusion. They were all closing at the end of that race together when Classic Empire was the only horse that, you know, really did all the hard work and kind of set it up for the race to fall apart. He and Cloud Computing really ran that day, and I thought nobody else really did. So, yeah, I'm landing on Patch, Epicharis, and a little Tappert.
All right, we've got a few questions from the crowd that we'll get to in the last 5 minutes or so that we have here tonight. A couple of these will be macro questions about the card. Here's a fairly straightforward one. You can interpret the term best bet however whatever it means to you as a handicapper. This can be a value play or just a likely winner to build some serious action around. But Mike wants to know each of your best bets on the card. David, we'll start with you.
I guess in terms of value, a horse that I think is going to be a really nice price and that also I think has a great chance to win would be Petrov and Woody Stevens. Just think he's going to get the perfect setup. And if he's anything around his 8-1 morning line, I think that's good value on him.
Mike, how do you want to address that one?
I'll say that. I'll say this. I'll say the horse that I maybe most want to bet on the card is Denman's Call on the Met Mile, just because to me that's the race with, you know, the vulnerable favorite that I don't like. You know, I feel like this horse is going to run well in the Met Mile on Saturday at a price. I like his recent form, so maybe he's the one I'm most looking forward to betting on at a price.
Here's another version of the same question, but I like it a little better, and it might lead you guys in a different direction. Is there a particular multi-race sequence on the whole day that you're looking forward to sinking your teeth into? Mike, this time we'll start with you.
Boy, I don't know how to answer that, really. I haven't thought about the card in that way yet. Just
Gotcha.
because,
it is early. It is Thursday night.
We did it mostly last night. I did all of it, and then I started looking at it again today. I mean, I did look at the early pick 5 already. You know, I don't know if that's the one that I'm going to wind up, you know, saying is the one that I most am interested in playing, but I'm definitely going to play the early pick 5. I think there are some interesting races in there to maybe get a price in and make it pay, even though Songbird is the last leg of it, which sort of hurts. I'm, you know, almost certainly going to play the pick 4 that goes into the Belmont, but we'll see. I haven't really mapped out a play for that yet.
Let me ask you an alternative question that just popped in my head. At what point do you usually get down to the brass tacks of that stuff? I mean, are you a wait till scratches kind of person the night before, the morning of? When do you start really formulating your wagering plan?
No, I'll do it the day before at least. I don't like to wait until, the card is already started. Obviously, you want to adjust for scratches when they come in, but I want to sort of start thinking about the races that I want to bet and then how I want to bet them at least the day before.
David, I'll ask you that same question about a particular multi-race sequence you might be interested in on the day.
Yeah, I kind of try to find certain anchor races throughout the card where I have really strong opinions and kind of feel like I can narrow it down to a couple of horses that I can really sort of key my multi-race wagers around, sort of like a pet drop in the Woody Stevens. If that horse wins, I kind of would hope that I'm able to win the multi-race wagers that go through that race. So, I mean, just talking about the multi-race wagers I like on this card, I guess the late pick 4, starting in race 8, feels like one where I can, really focus in on Celestine, who I do really like in the Just a Game. And, if I can get one of the long shots I like home in that Mile or the Belmont, that can really make that sequence pay well.
That's a very smart way of looking at it, looking for a horse to anchor a sequence with, where you also have the opportunity to reach out and touch one of the horses you like who's going to be a really big price, thus ensuring that you're going to be playing a multi-race wager that pays. We got a question about, and this was my fault as a host, I should have paused on this and explained for those that didn't know, when Mike was talking about the issues that Epicaris seems to be having. You can read all about it on drf.com right now, but the super fast version is it seemed like he was having some soundness or lameness issues and had been kept in the stall, I guess, yesterday and issued a shot of Butte. Was going to apparently attempt to get back to the track tomorrow. Obviously, if there's still an issue, the horse is going to be scratched. Horses' welfare always comes first. But as a handicapping factor, and Mike, you already mentioned that this was a concern to you, so I'll ask this of David. As a handicapping factor, is that relevant to you?
I try to look at it this way. If this were a normal day and not the Belmont Stakes, I probably wouldn't even know about that. So I don't want to give it more emphasis than I would in a normal scenario. Horses probably get a shot of Butte more often than we really know about. So, my take on it is if they're going to run in the race, having come all this way, they want to have a sound horse who's going to, give a good representation of himself. So if they're running, I'm going to assume the horse is pretty much fine. In big races like this, we really don't see horses pull like a big brown that often. If they're running, they usually run fairly well. So I'm kind of going to try to not focus on it too much.
We have a bunch of questions about specific horses. For the horses who are in the Belmont, I'm going to leave those and suggest that people who want to hear about every horse in the Belmont, check out last night's show, drf.com/YouTube. You'll get to hear Mike's thoughts and Andy Serling's thoughts on those. Also, of course, David, I haven't allowed you yet to plug the coverage that you're doing in much further depth than this. Why don't you tell us what that is, what that's going to comprise?
Yeah, so basically I'll be writing analysis of all of these stakes races. I'll be touching upon every single horse in every stakes race. And then I'll be laying out all of the wagers that I'm recommending, both intra-race wagers, win bets, exactas, trifectas, and also some key multi-race wagers that I want to hone in on.
Fantastic. An entire wagering game plan. Of course, you can read Mike's analysis in the pages of Daily Racing Form. A couple of just speed round horses to close out the webinar. Just a quick thought that comes into your mind on these guys as we're running out of time. Somebody wants to know if either of you guys give Harmonize any chance on the card.
No.
Yeah, her recent form is just not good enough to be competitive with that field.
We got a question about Mohaymen.
I kind of just felt like
I wish him luck.
Yeah, was he ever that good? Yeah, he's not for me.
The ultimate wise guy put down. I wish him luck. I love it. Anyway, you can get a lot more from the team here. Go to drf.com, check it out. Check out these replays. We're also going to be issuing a special discount offer on DRF Belmont coverage. You'll be getting that if you attended the webinar in an email. That's why, you can watch on YouTube. That's fine and good, but you get the good stuff when you attend. So I want to thank everybody for doing that. I really want to thank our special guest, David Aragona. It was an absolute pleasure working with you, and hopefully it wasn't too exhausting at the end of a long day and a long week.
Yeah, it was a pleasure doing this. Especially great to handicap the races with Mike, who I've been a follower of for a long time. Yeah, this was a real treat.
And Mike Beer, the MVP of at least my involvement at DRF this weekend, doing double duty in these two shows. I can't thank you enough. Lots of great insight, and we look forward to working with you again soon.
The check's in the mail, right?
Off air, I'll find out what you drink, and I'll take care of you, I promise.
Listen, it's my pleasure, Pete. Anytime, I'm happy to do it. And I was happy to finally get to. I didn't really get to talk to him, but let's say talk with David at the same time.
Excellent, excellent. All right, that's it, folks. That's all the time we have. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks to producer Jake for pushing all the right buttons. You've been watching a webinar produced by DRF.com.